Okay, welcome to your week 10 lecture content. This is going to be a reasonably long hit of information again today, split up into three parts: innovation, entrepreneurship, presentations, and then a bit of bonus content on professionalism, which is significantly shorter than the other ones. These three parts are semi-standalone. There's a few threads that we're going to draw between them to provide examples and context and relevance, but fairly standalone sections, presentations being the one that's probably most relevant to you because you have to give a presentation in week 12. And I'll talk about that then, and I'll talk about it again in the live stream at 4 o'clock, or at least I'll allow you to ask questions about it. So, innovation and entrepreneurship to start with are terms that you may not associate with engineering or you may not understand them at all. And that's fine. I'm going to take you through a process here. I'm very much not trying to turn you into entrepreneurs. I'm just going to sort of explain the process and what it is and how it might be relevant to you as an engineer. So traditionally, if we think about what would our engineering grads do when they finished university, a lot of people, at least when I went through 10 years ago, had the impression that their career path would lead to a job in a large company. They'd get paid a lot of money, probably in a primary industry, something like mining, or construction, or if they've got more of a software side, IT. And traditionally, that was most of our grads, and that's fine. But this is a field that's starting to change. What engineers are being employed to do is beginning to evolve. I shouldn't say it's beginning to evolve, it's constantly evolving. And we're going to look at where it might be sort of going next. So a lot of the jobs that my fellows went out and graduated with aren't things that even exist anymore. And a lot of what you will do will be new things. Some of them sitting still in fairly traditional places. So large mining companies, for example, are still going to exist into the future, but they're not necessarily going to get most of their money from mining coal out of the ground. And they're currently already looking at doing the research into, funding research into looking at mining in low gravity. So they'll be looking at a mining engineer to mine the moon, mine Mars, and mine asteroids. So they're doing that type of stuff. So when we say it's new jobs that don't exist, they're the types of things that you probably will end up doing. The other thing that is also drastically changing is small companies with global reach are becoming more and more prevalent. So it's not something that a lot of people necessarily assume that they will do when they graduate, is go work for what we call an SME, a small to medium enterprise. But it is going to be a major employer of all of you once you get out. Okay, so this is kind of my favorite example of the changing world. And this one's actually already fairly old. I don't know how many of you have heard of the game Star Citizen. It's a computer game that's still partially being made. The founders who wanted to make this game split off from whatever company they were working in and crowdsourced the revenue for this. So I think it was a GoFundMe page, but I think it was a Kickstarter page, but I'm not entirely sure. Anyway, how much money do you reckon they've received in order to make this game from randoms on the internet giving them a little bit of cash? $250 million. They got $250 million, and are correspondingly hiring huge numbers of people to rewrite game engines and all sorts of different stuff. So there's a whole bunch of engineers right now who are employed by a GoFundMe page to make a computer game. And these are the types of opportunities that are going to employ you one day as well. Very much not the mindset that would have happened 20 years ago, for example, going, I'm going to pay all my employees off random donations by strangers on the internet. So it's definitely something that is changing quickly. Happens in research as well. A whole bunch of research is now getting funded that way too. The overall thing that you're going to want to take away from this is evolve or die. So if you are stuck in an old mindset, you won't have a job for very long. If your entire skill set involves writing down, memorizing things, and solving problems the same way they've been solved in the past, you're not going to live for very long out there in the big bad changing world. Okay. What's going to be really important skills for you are going to be your ability to adapt, to solve problems creatively, to solve problems in new and novel ways rather than the ways they've been solved before. That's really going to be what allows you to be successful in a world where the goalposts keep shifting. Okay. The term that we would use here is agile. So training somebody to be agile, an agile person can adapt, can change, can move quickly. So I'm not trying to go, you all must be entrepreneurs, you must go and start your own companies, da 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 da. Definitely not. Definitely not for everybody. Definitely not something that everybody should do. But I do want to show you that it is an opportunity for you. It is something that you can do with your career. Engineers have always been people who have ended up in management roles and CEOs and stuff like that, generally because they are good problem solvers, get stuff done kind of people. So you're probably going to encounter this stuff no matter what. We've covered that. One of the main drivers here, and it certainly has been for us, is the fact that as a small company of 3 people, you can have global reach very easily. So our first customer is in Switzerland, looking at putting power stations into Germany, using us as a key part of their process. That has become very easy to be a global small company, and that's been changing the way in which we do business. I'm certainly not the only one, and I'm going to show you a bunch of stories of other people who have been really successful doing that with engineering degrees from Newcastle. So you may not want to be this, and that's perfectly fine. I didn't when I was an undergrad. But regardless, even if you do get a traditional role, you will almost certainly have to encounter this type of stuff at some stage. So a little bit of knowledge can go a long way. One common thing is large companies totally dumping R&D departments and just buying startups instead. So even in the more traditional companies, you still encounter this type of stuff. All right, so what I did, it will be the example, because I get to show you warts and all, a bit of the process of trying to do something a bit innovative in entrepreneurship with an engineering degree. So when I was a final year project student in my 4th year, and then early PhD student, I did a bit of work with thermionics. So this was something that my supervisors were working on. It wasn't strictly part of my PhD, but it's interesting. So it turns out if you get a material and you heat it up enough, you can impart enough energy into the electrons that they can escape their orbits. It's called a work function. If you can do this and give them a little bit of a leftover kinetic energy, you can effectively boil electrons out of a material, move them over some gap, collect them on something else, and create an electrical circuit that's powered solely by a temperature difference with no moving parts. Which is great, potentially. Wasn't great, but yeah, that's what we were working on. The issue that we realized with this is that if you can't store, you don't need power during the middle of the day. It's not something that we need anymore. We have enough ways of generating power in the middle of the day. We need power at night. So this process is useless because it was relying on the sun. So we really needed the ability to store energy more than we needed the ability to generate it. So that's what we did. Being material scientists, we went out and created a whole new field of metal alloys. My supervisors created it, and then I made a whole bunch more of it. I expanded the field. We spent 5 years doing this, making all these new metal alloys, testing them, determining they had great thermal conductivity, high temperature operation, they had a narrow operating range, were macroscopically solid at all levels of charge, and then we wrote papers on it. We got the patents taken out here and in Europe, and we went to international conferences, and no one cared. No one from industry cared. So academically, it was great. But in terms of actual applications into industry, there is this enormous divide between doing the great engineering and science and then actually having it make a difference and be applied. So that was the gap. And that's a really common gap that exists, definitely in Australia, but in most of the world, between the researchers pushing the boundaries of new and then the actual customers who are going to receive it with some business path in the middle. There's big gaps between these things. So the term that we use is an ivory tower. If you've never heard of it, it just means that as the researcher, you sit atop your ivory tower with all of your knowledge, and you're totally disconnected from the people at the ground, and you can't really affect them. So universities are these ivory towers of knowledge. They often don't share with each other very well. They definitely don't relate to what's happening down below necessarily very well. So this is trying to be fixed. I say fixed because it's not necessarily a bad thing. If you want to push the boundaries of research, you to some extent do want to sit at the top of an ivory tower. But trying to commercialize the great research that we do. So Australia particularly is fairly bad at commercialization of its research, partly because we have very good research outcomes in very traditional industries. But yeah, in commercializing the great research that we do, we're fairly poor at it. So big investments are being pushed into fixing a lot of this. Big government push, mainly. So the good thing about that is if you come up with any good ideas, there are now more pathways than there ever have been in this country in order to actually commercialize that research. One of the main things, though, that it requires is a different way of thinking about problems and thinking about the world. I think it's almost contradictory. It's not entirely contradictory to be good at doing the fundamentals and be good at doing the applications, but you definitely want to be able to totally switch your thinking between the two different fields. This is the quote that I believe sums it up best. Don't let perfect get in the way of good. So once we moved from academia into industry, this is something that we got told, and it really changed the way that we thought about things, because I was forever trying to make the perfect solution. Every time I looked at my product, I go, I can make that better, I can make that better, I can make that better. And people in business are going, it's already better than your competition. Just stop. It doesn't matter if you can make it better again. Just stop, push it out the door as it is. So very drastic change in the way in which we think. It's really important. Okay, so that was all fairly high level, fairly philosophical. I'll take you through some of the pathway here. So if you were to go out tomorrow, create some great thing, and decided, yes, I want to commercialize this, how do you actually do it? There are a huge number of programs out there designed to take people all the way through this process. So from it's just an idea all the way up to fully commercialized business running. And the best advice I could give is don't try to figure this stuff out by yourself. It's a minefield of failures. There are people who have done this hundreds of times and they know the path. They can show you the way. So the one that I did was CSIRO's ON program, which is a two-part process, which has an ON prime, they call the first part, which is very much, this is an early idea, and then an on accelerate, which follows on from that going, yeah, we're really onto something, we know what we're doing. So that's one option. I2N is the innovation hub here at Newcastle, and I've actually got a video from them that I'm going to play later, and they have a whole suite of programs to take people through that they talk about in great detail. But your other option is the university also offers a series of courses on how to do this type of stuff. So that's something that you can get as part of your uni degree and then go out and really be ahead of the curve on that. So the main thing that you learn in one of the early stages of the programs, any one of them, is to do what they call customer discovery. Find out literally who your product's going to help, who cares about it, who it's going to make a difference for, and how you can help that person the most. They'll talk about pains and gains for customers. What's the pain of the customer, and how are you going to solve that or take that away by using your product? And this is massive. This is something that huge amounts of effort will be put into is thinking about who your customer really is in this scenario. The other side of it is learning how to set your business up. So, what is it that your business actually needs? Where does it need help? How is it going to operate? How's it going to get funding? How's it going to survive and pay people and whatever? Um, Legals. So, how do you legally set up a company so that you don't get sued to oblivion? How do you get intellectual property, so patents and IP and stuff like that? So you kind of learn these two different things in parallel: how to business as well as how to actually make a solution that helps a person. And if you can get through this, this is the type of thing that you can then do for a career for the rest of your life. So it is a lot of these people starting out with just a little idea. They push it through one of these processes, and this ends up just being what they do. All right, so if this is the type of thing that you want to be part of, you can start really early. So there is a student society at the university, which is really cool. These guys, they have a Facebook and an Instagram, I think. So feel free, just Google that or Facebook that, UON Innovation Entrepreneurship Student Society, and you should be able to find them pretty easily. As I said, the Innovation Hub here in Newcastle, and what I'm going to do is play this video for you because I went to them and said, hey, I'm doing this presentation, gives video please. And they did, and it is somewhere there. All right, so it's 8 minutes long. I'm just going to play this whole thing. It's fairly self-explanatory.
I'm the program coordinator of the Integrated Innovation. Hey everyone, my name is Richard. I'm the program coordinator of the Integrated Innovation Network, or the I2N. And I just wanted to spend 5 minutes introducing you to the I2N and letting you know how the university is supporting entrepreneurships and startups across campus and the region. So, a little bit of background. 40% of today's jobs will likely not exist within the next 2 decades. And kindergartners today will have 17 different jobs and 5 career changes over their lifetime at a minimum. The potential to create new jobs in startups that use tech to reach global markets is immense. And the University of Newcastle recognizes that immense opportunity and has reacted by creating things like all of these programs that you can access as an undergrad and a postgrad at the uni in your time as a student. So they've come up with also the Integrated Innovation Network, which allows us to help entrepreneurs explore, experiment, accelerate, and scale. Now, we do that in a few ways, notably through some physical hubs. We have I2N Hub at Muswellbrook, I2N Hub at Williamtown, our hub at Hunter Street, and soon to open our hub at Honeysuckle. Most notably for some of you, you may have already heard of it, is the I2N Hub at Hunter Street. This was opened a few years back and is just across the road from New Space. We have about 300 square meters of across 2 floors, and we house a bunch of startups, scale-ups, big corporates, and students working from the hubs. We'll be soon opening I2N Hub at Honeysuckle. That'll be early 2021. It'll have a whole lot more space. It'll be co-located with the School of Creative Industries, and a bunch of our activity will happen and transition to that building. That activity is really cool in that no matter who you are, whether you're a student, staff at the uni, or a member of our community, you can jump in, and no matter what stage you're at in your entrepreneurial endeavor, from the very start of just having an idea or wondering how you can find impact, all the way to having a team solving a problem and generating revenue, you can jump in and take part. So the first part, and think of this as a pipeline for you to activate, to enter and activate on, is Entrepreneurship 101. So let's say you just want to understand the fundamentals, build some skills, work out how you could fit into this. Entrepreneurship 101 is a great all online activity and course that you can do. I2N Navigator is a 2-day or 3-day intensive course that takes you through entrepreneurship, looks at you as an individual, teases out the skills that you've developed in your life and in your professional life, and finds out how you can find and apply that impact to the world through solving problems for people, building businesses in any way, shape, or form you want. I2N Validator is a 12-week pre-accelerator and a program based on the Lean Launchpad method or Lean methodology. It's devoted to customer discovery, where we get a bunch of teams who have done a little bit of work. Maybe they've been through Navigator previously, and they're going out and they're talking to people and finding what problems they're having, how they can dictate their product development. And there's a bunch of tools that you use within that. There's a bunch of questioning methods, interpersonal skills that you use that we teach you and get you working with outside the building. I-Twin Accelerator is another 12-week program that will run next year. An incubator is an ongoing program where we have startups sitting in our hubs, working from there, utilizing all of the resources the university offers, working learning students, technical skills within the university, assets and tools that they can use within the university, as well as the ecosystem itself. We're a big network and we connect people and teams to the things that they need: coaching, capital, all the customers. And we have a bunch of events that we run through each of these hubs. So Startup Stories is a fantastic example of a speaker, usually from Newcastle, who has some sort of tie to the region. They've started a company, they've come from here, they've grown up here, and they'll talk about warts and all their experience founding a company, building a team, and solving problems and growing that out. This month we had our Vice Chancellor, Professor Alex Zielinski. He spoke about his experience founding Seeing Machines back in the early 2000s from Canberra. And next month, we'll have Kylie Barrett from Design Nuts talking about building a tool to get spatial awareness and creativity skills within teachers and students. We have Join the Dots, our monthly networking event. This is an opportunity for people within the region and within the university, researchers, staff, founders, professionals, talking about what it is that they're doing within a particular paradigm. So this month we're talking about adapting to change. So we'll have a few people talking about what they've done given the introduction of COVID-19 and how they've maintained their business activity and adapted, and what cool things that they've done or tested and had happen that have yielded some good results. That happens on the last Wednesday of every month. We have Ideas Collider, which is a 1-hour mini hack for the entre-curious. It gives you an introduction to solving problems at a fast pace, problems that you may not be very aware of, and we break you up into teams. I do this with the iLead cohort. I'll be doing two cohorts next week, running all online, introducing them to water security and how they can solve that. We run a hackathon every year. It's a 24 or 48-hour prototype development challenge. It's always themed. Last year was disaster resilience. The year before that was aged care. And stay tuned for this year's topic. We have immersives where we introduce participants in a 1 to 3 hour seminar with a domain expert, talking about the business model canvas, the lean methodology, product development, pitching something that people want to sink their teeth into and know more about to drive their project forward. And we have VMS, or Venture Mentor Service. This is a complimentary service offered to all incubating startups throughout the I2N, and it's based on a world-class MIT model and available for all founders. So if you're a part of a team, this is something that can really help you get over your hurdles within it as a business owner, and use team mentoring to push you forward as a better founder and a better entrepreneur. And a great example for you as students, as undergrad students, is the Elite Robotics team. Now, I use these guys as an example simply because they were an undergrad team. One of their founders is now doing or completed his PhD. They started as an undergrad team, and they took advantage of everything that the university threw at them, everything that the state threw at them, every opportunity they could take, they captured. So they won pitching contests and got money for that. They used that money to apply for an MVP grant, which is a New South Wales state grant. They then used that money to build their MVP, which allowed them to get forward sales, which allowed them to also get scholarships to go to China and Canada. They took up every opportunity that was offered to them, and it really yielded some fantastic results. And that's a great example for you as undergrad students to take. And if you have an interest in entrepreneurship or being part of a startup, taking part in all the programs that are offered, and maybe coming out on the other side with a team solving a real problem. So far, to wrap up, we've done a bunch of activity. You can see here there's heaps of events that we've had, heaps of businesses we've touched. But the real meat in this is that we've pushed through teams through our cohort-based programming. We've had heaps of people go through our entrepreneurship programming and come out on the other side as teams. These teams are doing all different things in all different industries, but the point is they use the programs, the help that's on offer in the region to push their team and to push their idea and their business forward. So our ask is that you join into within events and programs at the I2N and follow up by checking our details out at newcastle.edu.au/I2N. And if you want to reach out to me, come in for a Friday check-in in the afternoon, email me and we can organize a Zoom, and And we can talk about what it is that the iTrain can do for you and where you can slot into its suite of programs. Thanks for the time today.
Okay, so part of the reason why I wanted you to see that is so that you can see that there's a whole bunch of stuff out there and a whole bunch of things that you can do if you want to be part of this. They're not the only people doing it though. I'm really, really trying to get Red Bull Basement here at some stage in the near future for all of you to have a go at that. As I said, I did the CSIRO's on program, and that's some of those electives that I mentioned earlier. One of the things to know about these is they're generally something that the first one or two, like a hackathon or something like that, is really, really low barrier to entry. They're not hard to get in, they're not hard to do, and if you find out at the end of it you don't like it, it's no real loss. They're not huge commitments to make. Cool. All right, so that's one part of this entire innovation entrepreneurship thing. Another whole part of it is very much your network, they call it. Who you can reach out to and get help when you need it. So, basically, the more of these things that you do, the more things you participate in, the more events that you go to and whatever, the more people that you meet, and then the more often you can get in a situation where you need help and you can reach out to somebody. And if you've set yourself up with a good reputation, then they will generally say yes to you. So, you've really got to kind of be in it to win it in these environments. One of the things that you will learn very quickly, and you may have gotten it from the way that Richard spoke, is there's a whole lot of buzzwords and terminology that gets used in this particular industry. And none of it will make any sense to you at the start, but the more people you talk to, the more natural this vocabulary takes. And then you can talk the talk as well. You can meet the right people, and you can be very, very successful. They love LinkedIn. Everybody in this industry loves LinkedIn. So if you want to go into here, you're definitely going to need to get yourself a LinkedIn profile. Okay, so assuming you do this, you have a good idea, you go through, you do an incubator or an accelerator or whatever, you make a company, you build your network. How does it actually play out? Generally, what most people need is money. Okay, and that's generally the metric that gets used to assess how well a company is progressing, is how much money it's getting. But most of the time you don't get money from selling products, at least not for quite a long time in this process, particularly if you're doing anything highly innovative and highly new. Before you can actually sell products to customers and make money, there's generally a lot of development that you need to do, and that costs money. So how do you get money before you're selling products? Well, generally you take investment. So you continually take money from different people to allow you to set your business up to the point where it can begin making money from its own selling of products. So your cash flow, you are losing money, and then finally you're starting to sell things, and that's starting to make a difference. And this can be years. Okay. Depending whether it's something like an app, you'd expect it to get flipped. They call it quite quickly. Might be a couple of months, and you might have your app out. But for anything that's what we call deep tech, which is hardware that's being developed to solve a novel problem, 2, 5, 10 years is not unexpected to exist in the negative. So places where you can get this money from, and they are listed here, but you can get money in general. A lot of companies get it from what are called angel investors. So an angel investor is somebody who invests in a team right at the start when they've got not a whole lot more than an idea. They're generally their first hit of money that they get, and they use generally somewhere between $10,000 and $50,000. And they use that to really sort of get some momentum and maybe test their device out or something like that. Make the first one. Make your first product, for example. So that's incredibly risky investment. So generally, what happens in this scenario is somebody goes, "Yes, I'll give you ten or $20,000, and I want 10% of your company as a result, so 10% of your shares." Um, and normally that's a bad deal, but hey, you might really need that first little bit of money to sort of get yourself rolling. Once you've got that and you've started to roll, there's tiers of investment, and generally you give away a chunk of equity, so a percentage of shares in your company, and somebody gives you money as a result. The idea here is that you've got your pie, you've got your company, and you're giving away pieces of it each time you get investment, but you're trying to grow the value of that pie each time that you do. And as long as you can grow value faster than you're giving it away, overall you end up being better off. Okay, so not uncommon to go something like $20,000 angel, maybe 100K seed, a million Series A, and a couple of million Series B. So that's what you're trying to do, grow up like that. We recently took 500,000 in seed, for example. Um, we actually didn't take any angel funding, so this is something that can be really important of getting stuck in this valley of death. You might give away your first 10% equity for $20,000, but your next 20% equity you might give away for $500,000. So if you can not give away not give away equity early and get money from somewhere else, that can be a really, really good thing for you. So government money is a really good place to get it from. Some people raise from friends and family, which you could not pay me enough to ask my friends and family for money for my company. But you can get it from other people. And then after that, after you've gotten a few $1 million in funding, you're generally up at the point where you've got quite a lot of revenue coming in from sales, and then you become a very, very safe person to invest in. And sometimes companies will do what they call a public offering or going public, and often making millions and millions of dollars just selling to shares to random people in the public. What's interesting about this whole process is at some stage, if you start as a founder, you need a way of getting out. Because although you may own some percentage of shares in a company that's worth X million dollars, that's great on paper, but that's not actually worth anything until you can sell those shares to somebody else. So you need a strategy that's going to allow you to do that at some stage. And they call it having an exit strategy. And all different companies and different founders have all different types of exit strategies. All right, as I've sort of started to mention already, the Australian government over the last couple of years has invested heavily into this. So CSIRO was given the money to make the ON program to help get people through some of this. Some universities are investing heavily in it as well. One of the person who used to lead the ON program just went to a university that's basically running the same thing. The state government and the federal government invest in this, so there's a whole bunch of different things. You may remember from Richard's presentation before, he mentioned that Elite Robotics got an MVP grant. That's a state government grant. And others. Large companies are also investing in this. So Shell, for example, runs its own incubator, and so do a bunch of the international power companies. Basically, it's often cheaper to not permanently pay an R&D department, but to fund startups and then just buy them at the end. And this is a real strategy a lot of startups take. Their exit, their entire plan is to make a startup, grow it to the point where somebody big is going to acquire it, they call it, just buy them out and take it. And so they deliberately build companies where that's the only end goal. They never expect to sell a product in their life, they just expect to be bought by a big company at some stage. And then, yeah, if you've got a particular solution to a problem, generally one that can really tug on a heartstring, a lot of people go after crowdfunding or after a philanthropist. Okay, the only other thing that I'll point out here is this conversation almost always revolves around money. And it revolves around money far more than it should, because people can provide support in ways that is more than just giving you money. Um, a lot of the times you want to align yourself with somebody who offers money and something else, whether that's connections into bigger industries or whatever. Um, Cash isn't the only metric of success. If you do this, if you go in, get your company, start trying to do that, there is no concept of working a 9 to 5. That won't happen. You will work when you need to work, and you won't work when you don't have anything to do. And you probably won't get paid a salary. So I don't get paid a salary for my company. We've just started paying one founder, um, but it's very likely that you won't get paid a normal salary. You won't get paid $32 an hour or anything like that in this case. You heard Richard mention that kindergarteners will change careers N times or something. I have no idea where those numbers come from. I know that people do talk about things like having 10 jobs before you're 30. Talk about deliberately changing roles every 6 months within a company to keep things fresh. Not having a boss anywhere in their teams. These are all ways in which startups work, predominantly to remain agile. Um, some of which are very successful, some of which are not. But it's something that you'll have to get used to. And predominantly, probably the biggest change in the startup world that I've noticed is they want you to fail. Not as a not in a menacing way, but they'll highly encourage fail fast, fail cheaply, push things until they break. Don't The whole lean startup method is basically one centered around failing things as often and as quickly as you possibly can. And if you can't deal with that, this can be a really difficult place to work. You're going to be wrong a lot. When we applied to a particular accelerator at one stage, a really big international one, they said, show us your battle scars. Show us all the things that you've gotten wrong with your company. And we were really young at the time, and we went, what do you mean? We haven't messed anything up yet. And they went, nope, not taking you. You're not trying hard enough if you're not failing. So this can be really jarring for some people to get used to, but it is certainly the way in which it is moving. Cool. All right. So a bit of a summary. Any of these processes generally start with somebody solving a problem somewhere first. That's the fundamental thing. And if you don't have a good solution to a problem, you can wrap it in as much BS as you want, but you're going to have a really, really hard time of life. No one ever talks about your tech. No one ever wants you to talk about your tech, but having good tech at the core of what you're doing is fundamentally important to being successful. So don't think that any of this is a replacement to being a good engineer. It's just something that sits on top of it. And then once you've got your great idea, you've got your brilliant solution, don't try and do it all yourself. There's other people out here and they're more than willing to help you. So go get help, do programs, ask for advice, call people up. They will help you. And then it's largely about being present. Being successful in this is more or less about how often you can put your face out there and look like someone who wants to be there. They call it leaning in. Not sitting back and being cynical and jaded about a process that sometimes the process could do with people being a little bit more cynical about it. But that's not what makes you successful in this case. And the one thing that I will point out if you get involved in any of this is it's a process. You'll notice a lot of things are stated as fact that aren't necessarily fact. They might be right a lot of the time, but they're not always going to be right. So one of the things that you'll find a lot is a lot of talking to customers and asking them what they want and then making a solution that answers the things that the customer told you they wanted. And that's not necessarily the right way to do it. A lot of the time, the customer isn't right. A lot of the time, the customer is totally wrong. The best summary of this I've seen is Henry Ford, when doing customer discovery before making the Model T automobile, the most successful car of all time. Customer discovery was, if you asked them what they wanted, they would have said faster horses. The normal people don't see innovation. That's actually your job as an engineer, to do the innovative step, not to look to your customers for that. The other really good example is Apple. So, my phone, I don't have my phone on me, but I've used this example before. If you ask customers how many of them they wanted to have you take away their headphone jack, they all said no, right? That was the meme for so very long. Nobody wanted to lose the headphone jack. Apple did it anyway. And now, me having an Android phone, and yeah, I laughed when all of the headphone jacks got taken out of all the iPhones. My Samsung S20 doesn't have a headphone jack. They were in front. They were ahead of the curve. They innovated in spite of what their customers wanted. So don't think that it's the only way to think about the problem. And this is the other thing that I personally find a little bit annoying with some of the programs that you'll do, that I just advise you to do, is it is a bit of a cookie cutter formula. It assumes that the formula will work the same for everybody involved, and it doesn't, and it can be a little bit challenging. Cool, I covered that. All right, so a couple of examples for you here. Just to finish sort of this section on a few examples. So these are all engineers from Newcastle. So Z Squared DSP. I've opened these up already. I just need to go and Z Squared DSP. So this is an electrical and a mechatronics engineer. Went and created this really amazingly cool guitar pedal that allows you to do all sorts of really sweet stuff. And I like them because they have a technical blog. And they go through and, yeah, took a bunch of the stuff that they learned in their engineering degree, and they had a musician's background, so they went and made the best guitar pedal you can buy on the market for $300 using the stuff that they learned in their engineering degree, which is amazing. So that's one group. Another group is Obelisk Systems. So I think these guys were predominantly mechatronics and maybe computer systems engineers. But anyway, they went and made Starlab. Well, Obelisk Systems, one thing that they do is Starlab. And it's a cool bot that is coupled with a bunch of how to code tutorials, and they give it to educators to deliver into schools. So don't know if any of you actually ever encountered Starlabs in your schooling system, but yeah, they're a bunch of engineers from Newcastle. There's Diffuse Energy, good friends with these guys. We did PhDs together and stuff like that. Most efficient wind turbines on the planet for their size, which is really cool because they got this thing called a diffuser around the outside, which is awesome. So these guys are being really successful now. They're up at the I2N hub at Williamtown. Then there's MJ Thermal. They're my people doing stuff. So that's not meant to be an exhaustive list by any means. It's just a few of them that have all come out of engineering in the last couple of years, and show you a bit of the diversity of where you could end up with your degree. All right, so big expanding field. Not something that you have to do by any means. It's not for everybody. It's fine, but you will almost certainly run into it eventually, so knowing a bit about it could be useful. And it's very much not something that you have to, it's very much something you have to be present for. It's not something you can just sort of chill and be like, oh yeah, it's a thing, I'll maybe do some of it. You really want to get involved if you want to be successful. Cool. All right. So sort of segueing from there into some presentation skills. ordinarily when I give this presentation, I actually get a few of those people from those companies to come in and pitch to you so that you can see what their company does and you can watch the way in which they present. And then that sort of segues into, hey, presentation skills, really important. Don't obviously have the ability to do that at the moment. So instead, I'm going to talk to you just about general presentation skills. So at first, this is week 12. What week 12 is going to look like for you. There is a procedure document that I'm going to put up today, later today, and I'm going to talk about it at 4 o'clock in the live stream as well. And it's just going to talk about how week 12 is going to run in general, the logistics of it and stuff like that. Depending on whether you decide to do the project as normal, you'll give a 2-minute pitch if you're doing project testing. If you're doing the design report, you'll give a presentation of up to 10 minutes where you demonstrate how, you show me how your particular design would work. You will give this live over Zoom or Discord, either one, whatever your regular scheduled platform is. You have more or less complete control from that point onwards. There's a few things that I want to see in it, but the way in which you structure it, the way in which you present it is up to you, including how many people speak. So it's one team presentation. That means that you can have everybody in your team talk within that 2 minutes, or you can just have one spokesperson for that 2 minutes. However you decide to break it up is up to you. I'm going to totally leave that up to you. If you're doing project demonstration, so you'll give your 2-minute pitch and then you'll demonstrate whether your project actually working. It's testing. If you're not demonstrating, as I said, you'll get a longer presentation. You're encouraged to include a lot of visuals, a lot of models, any videos or anything that you've got of part of your project working, anything like that should go into that presentation. And your main objective there is to convince me that it would work if you had not been impacted by the COVID system, basically. Don't write it down. Please don't write it down on a piece of paper and read it, especially if you're doing the 2-minute presentation. That's just an unacceptable way to present. Your overall goal here is to convince me that out of everybody in the room, you are the team I should invest in. Now, that's very specifically worded, that you're the team I should invest in. Just because you have the best product doesn't necessarily mean that you're the people I should invest in, or inversely, just because you don't have the best product. If you know exactly why you don't have the best product, that might be enough for me to go, yes, that's going to perform badly on test day, but they know exactly why. They are the people I would hire out of this whole workshop or project or whatever. So some things I want to see you do: identify your problem briefly and highlight your scope as required. So all of you have roughly the same problem definition, and I don't need to hear exactly the same problem identification every time. What I want to know about is, how did you uniquely identify your problem? What did you see as the most important parts of it to try to solve? I then want to know how your solution works and why it works. What sets you apart from the rest of the competition? What's your unfair advantage? Why are you better than everybody else? And what costs are we talking about here? So I've gotten this question a few times, and I'm sure I'll get it a bunch more times as well. I want to know the cost that it was to make this one. So what's everything you had to spend, even if you made something and you didn't use it, or it broke, or whatever, all of those costs combined. And then the costs, if you were to make another one tomorrow, knowing all the things that maybe you got wrong before, what would it cost you to make one good one? And then what would your costs be as a best estimate for mass production? So an example of where this cost might change is if you needed to buy 2 screws for some reason. And those screws, you could buy them in a pack of 1,000 and they were $0.01 each, or you could buy them in a pack of 5 and they were 30 cents each. Maybe you bought the pack of 5 because you actually ended up saving money, right? But at the mass production level, you'd buy the pack of 1,000 and it'd be cheaper, and you can work that number out where you benefit from scale. If you have a project where cost doesn't make as much sense, like the software project, then you won't talk about that at all. But I think every other project should talk about that. If you're doing an Arduino based project, it's all your sensor costs and stuff need to be talked about. Okay, and then you need to state your expected performance. So how well is this thing going to go in the testing that you're just about to do? Or if you were to build it, how well would it go? All right, so in terms of marks, what this does is effectively allows you to prep me to interpret how good of a solution you have to your project. So testing for most of you won't go flawlessly. There'll be some hiccups in it and things like that. This gives you the ability to position me as a marker to interpret what happens in the absolute best possible light and go, yeah, okay, this one didn't perform very well, but they prepped me for that and told me that's because it's the absolute cheapest one imaginable. So it's not highly efficient, but it is very, very cheap. You get the opportunity to do that. What's your win? What's your unfair advantage? What's your sell? It can multiply how it can actually multiply your project testing mark. So a really good presentation that demonstrates exceptionally good problem identification and whatnot can definitely up your mark. And somebody who clearly has no idea what's going on can definitely lose or have their mark scaled down as a result. This is mainly to help balance uneven distributions of workload within the project throughout the semester. So somebody who I haven't seen since week 2 randomly shows up on week 12 and goes, yeah, I'm in this team. That may be difficult for them. I say that only one person has to present, and that's definitely true, but anyone can be asked a question. So if you have one spokesperson, great, fine. But assume then that I'm probably going to ask most of my questions to other team members to see how well they actually understand what's going on. You can all ask questions as well. So you can ask questions of your peers. Everybody will generally present to the whole class or at least a decent sized subsection of the class. And you can ask nasty questions if you want to ask nasty questions. Go for it. Just be aware that the entire rest of the class is probably going to ask nasty questions to you as a result. This may sound difficult. It's not meant to be. It's basically meant to be, if you've worked on the project really well throughout semester, you're going to know all this stuff inside and out. It's going to be super easy, and it gives you the ability to make sure that everybody else understands how great you are. That's its job. Okay? If you've got a terrible project, yeah, it'll be hard. But it's not meant to be difficult for somebody who's done a good job at the project. It's just stand up and tell me why your project's cool. And I'm going to give you a whole bunch of presentation skills for the next, hour or as long as this takes. Not everything I teach you today is directly relevant to what you need for week 12. I'm going to teach presentation skills in general, okay? Some of it being applicable to week 12. As I said, if you've got questions about this, 4 o'clock in the live stream, we'll answer them then. All right, right back at the start. In the same way where we talked about written communication, oral communication. You've got the same fundamental principles that underline both types of communication. Your job is to make your audience smarter. Right? That was why we did writing right back at the start. This is why we do oral communication. And you do it in exactly the same way. You have an idea in your head, you figure out how you're going to encode it, message it to somebody, have them decode it, and then move that information into their head. Hold on to that logic because you've already hopefully you already know all of this, and we're just switching the communication method from written to oral. One thing that I find is probably the most common trap for young players in this case is believing that a presentation and a speech are the same thing. They're very much not. Speeches are something that an engineer almost never gives us what I would call a speech. I commonly give presentations. Rarely is that presentation a speech. And that may be the only type of oral communication you've done before, is give a speech. And it's a trap. It's not something that we want to fall into. So just like we did for writing, we apply the normal rules: drafting, planning, revising, proofing, and we just add the extra one on the end of practice. You have to practice to give a good speech. You have to practice to give a good written communication. Remember the same thing, noise is your fault. So if your audience gets confused in any way, that's on you. And we have some new sources of noise. Obviously, when we're speaking to somebody, you can get actual normal noise and things like that involved. And again, we want to think about how we're going to control all of that. And I've got some certain tips for that. The main one is to share communication between what you're saying and what you can communicate visually. This is probably also one of the main differences, I would say, between a speech and a presentation, is you get to use visuals in a presentation, and you should be relying on them heavily. You'll need to be good at this, so you'll present several times throughout your engineering degree. Partially, your final year projects will all need to be presented. But once you get out of here, you're going to spend a lot of time doing presentations. Probably not a lot of time writing speeches or necessarily giving something like a lecture, but you'll do presentations in meetings and things like that, presentations to tradesmen, and by that I mean like toolbox meetings and giving instructions and stuff like that all the time. So learning these things is going to be very valuable to you once you're out of here. Cool. So one of the things that I got exposed to during the on program was one Joe O'Reilly. So she's employed by she was employed by the on program to come in and teach us how to give good and engaging presentations. I don't necessarily agree with every single thing that she would teach us, but she's undeniably fantastic at what she does. She's an ex stand-up comedian, opera singer, and now teaches presentation skills. Really, really cool person. So one of the things that she pushed on us a lot was her 3 pillars of a good presentation. So I'll summarize them here for you. Number 1 is content. So it's by far the least important of your 3 pillars. Engineers will focus on the content of their presentation, thinking that that is the most important part of it, not really being able to empathize with the fact that that's probably not what the audience is there for. To some extent, an audience is always there to be at least slightly entertained. And whilst good content can help, it's not actually what the audience is there for. I like this. This is just a Harry Potter quote talking about their old history professor teaching them Goblin Wars, Giant Wars, something like that, saying you can have the most interesting content in the world, but if you've presented in a boring way, you're going to lose your audience. And once you've lost their interest, you can't teach them anything anymore. So, yes, good content is required, but it's not on its own enough. I think a good thing to think about in terms of how to get the right content across is to really think through what is it that you need to communicate in this format. So where people get in trouble is they try to communicate a lot of content in the wrong way. So presentations are really good for certain types of communication, and they're not good for, say, big chunks of text. They're certainly not good for something like a table of data. Isn't something you ever want to read inside of a presentation. So that's an area where having the wrong content can really hurt you. But yeah, engineers focus a little bit too much here. It is important, but it's the least important. Apparently, the most important is your physicality. So you will have heard body language being used a lot, or eye contact being used a lot. But physicality, it is that, but it's more than that. It's your entire physical presence, and apparently, this is the thing that makes somebody an engaging or an unengaging presenter more than anything else. Um, and I do think it's probably something that almost everybody overlooks too much. And it was something that Joe focused on heavily with us. So I don't know how well this is going to work over the camera in the little room, but I'll try a couple of things that I definitely got wrong and Joe definitely tried to help with. So I'm just going to tab out for a second so I can see if can I see myself in the camera? Yeah, that'll do. All right. So what we actually spent a huge amount of time with Joe on was how to walk onto stage, which sounds ridiculous, but she trained us heavily in it. And I definitely used to walk onto stage, head down, look at the floor, turn around. Okay, today we're going to be talking about all the things that are really interesting to me and you don't really care about. And it was partly because I get really excited. I get very nervous and really excited about the things that I want to present because I love the stuff that I present, right? So what I would do, walk into stage, head down, looking at my mark where I want to start, take the stage, immediately start talking, and my stance is all wrong. So something that I'm really bad for is taking a power stance. So either feet really wide, squared up, or I actually sometimes stand almost like I'm going to tackle somebody. And I laughed the first time I got told this. I was like, what? No way. And got some feedback, and people were like, yeah, we don't sit in the first couple of rows because you look like you're going to punch me in the face. And I didn't know that. What we were taught to do instead was when you walk in and you take the stage, slow down, you walk with even feet. So I'm normally up on my toes. You get even feet, you're looking around, you're looking at the crowd as you walk in. You take your stance, hands by your side, feet are lined up with your shoulders, your head's up, you stop for like 2 seconds to allow the whole audience to see you before you begin to speak. And it is amazing how you can watch somebody go from very clearly scared, nervous, doesn't want to be here, no presence, or yeah, big, gonna fight you type presence, to simply a good, proper, inviting speaker. And that changes everything about how well your presentation is then received. Okay, and then you open your mouth, and then your tone of voice becomes important. This obviously varies massively naturally between different presenters. What's probably the most unknown thing is you can actually change the way you speak. You can change your voice from being a normal speaking voice versus an authoritarian conveying voice or something very gentle and soft. So I spent a bit of time, went to a speech pathologist, talked to them. I'm what they call a professional voice user as a lecturer, about how to project a voice or how to not and whatever. Now, I'm naturally blessed with a voice that got me in trouble as a child for being big and loud and annoying. And it's because I speak from the back of my throat, and you push the words from your throat all the way out of your mouth, and it gives you that big, deep voice. And I can actually enhance that by starting my words deeper in my throat. Inversely, you can actually remove that by speaking with your mouth. And so now I'm actually just speaking basically using my lips, and in this scenario, my voice changes quite a lot. So people who don't project generally speak predominantly with their mouth. And by simply pushing the words from the back forward, it requires a lot more energy to do it. But you can put that extra energy into your words and you can project them. So if you've got a quiet voice, that is actually something you can work on and improve. It's not easy, and I wouldn't try and get it fixed by week 12. But just, yeah, interestingly, it is actually something that you can work on. Something else that you can work on that's really important is the pace at which you speak. So I historically speak way too fast when I present. And a lot of people do, and it leads to them being very difficult to understand. Predominantly, it's actually your first maybe two sentences that you say when somebody's still getting used to you as a presenter. Maybe they've never heard you before. Maybe they don't really pick up your accent particularly well. Maybe they're playing on their phone and they're not really listening to you. Delivering your first couple of sentences nice and slowly allows people to get in and get used to you and be engaged. Whereas if you deliver them quickly and somebody doesn't hear them or doesn't process them quickly enough because of whatever reason, you can lose your audience within that first couple of sentences. And once you've lost them, you're dead. You're not going to get them back. So attention is highly important to being a successful presenter. If you don't have attention, I don't care how good your content is, you're never going to get it across to anyone. So you've got to be able to maintain attention. First impressions make a massive difference. And Joe's thing, why she spent so long training us on how to walk the stage, is you can lose half your audience before you open your mouth. So everything about what you do is important to holding somebody's attention, which is important to conveying good content and thus being a good communicator. Even if you are quite good, you're not going to be able to hold attention for an entire 2-hour lecture, for example, as just one huge big stream of conscience. So being able to break it up into sections, subsections, whatever, is really useful for helping people continue to pay attention to you. So even in something like a 10-minute presentation, that is a little bit long to totally hold somebody's attention, and you might need something in there to sort of break it up and go, okay, that was the first part. Now let's move on to the next part. And that might be all you need, but that can be enough to help hold on to somebody's attention. So stopping and recapping and things like that. I'm going to show you a bunch of tricks about how I control my pace in a lecture later on in a couple of slides time. So I'll show you how I do it. You don't have to do it my way. I'll just show you how I do it. Yeah, 7, 38, 55% are all words, tone, body language. I don't know where these numbers come from. They get quoted at you all the time. This is something that I actually also... It took me a while to wrap my head around it, but I think this is why a lot of people end up doing badly in terms of holding attention with presentations that they write, is they take it for the granted that the audience is going to want to listen to them. And most of the time, that's just not true. So you need to provide some way to make the audience want to listen to you if you want to hold on to their attention. They don't owe you anything. So you've got to have the right voice, physicality, content in order to keep them there. So this one's interesting as well. This is something that Joe sort of beat into me, and it was a reason why I disagreed with her on a few things at the start, and she eventually beat it into me and made me understand it. So I take a power stance because I'm comfortable in it. So I don't know if you can see my face, but it doesn't really matter. Standing with my feet shoulder width apart directly underneath me is really uncomfortable for me. It hurts my hips. To be comfortable, I splay my legs out. I stand wide. I'm much more comfortable here. Now, my argument is always that the more comfortable I am, the better a presentation I'm going to be able to give. And being uncomfortable would have made me a worse presenter. But the thing that Joe beat into me is, you're not there to be comfortable. That's not your job. You're there to make your audience comfortable. So I don't care if it hurts your hips. That's how you stand, because otherwise it's going to make the people around you uncomfortable. Get over it. And I think once I realized that I wasn't there to be good, I was there to make my audience have a good time, I think that fundamentally makes you a better presenter once you can acknowledge that. Cool. All right, so although I said it's probably the least important part of it, I'm talking about the content for the next 2 slides. Sort of what should and shouldn't go into presentations. And we've touched on this, that you want to really consider for the content that you're going to put in your presentation is what's the best way to convey this information. You often will give a presentation in conjunction with something else. So you'll give a presentation and then hand in a report. So a lot of the time it's going, okay, what do I actually want to get across in my presentation? And it's not everything. You don't try to sum up an entire report into a presentation. You pick key bits of information out and tell a story with it such that you can lead somebody through the process. Anything that's just deep dive into data, that goes in a report, okay? And they can read that later. You don't have to do it in your presentation. So you don't want to do stuff like this. Absolutely smash people with overloads of information that can be summed up into a few short dot points maybe, and then if somebody's interested, they can go and read it again later. We sort of touched on this as well. Our presentations are diverse. What goes into a speech is quite different to what goes into a presentation. It's quite different to what would go into a lecture, and it's quite different to what would go into a business pitch. So being aware of the type of presentation that you are giving is really important. It totally affects your content. This kind of sucks because it means I can't say, okay, here are the things that always go in a presentation. Make sure you do this, do this, do this, and do that. Because whilst that might be the right format for a conference presentation, it's totally the wrong format for a pitch or a lecture. So there is no one cookie cutter way of presenting that you should be using at all times in terms of what content should go in. What I find is better is pick the 3 things you want your audience to take away, or the 1 thing, or the 2 things that you want your audience to take away from this, and just make sure that everything that you put in your presentation roughly tells that story. Particularly for a short presentation, like a pitch or a conference presentation, or what you're going to be giving on week 12. So this is a presentation from Apple. That's their slide. They got one guy on stage and their slide says number 1 smartwatch. This is the epitome of they're not overdoing it, they're not overloading it, they have one message and that's what they want you to know. Right? Now there's no noise, there's no confusion, there's one thing that you're going to take away from that. So that's something that these guys are phenomenal at doing well. Very clear messaging. So I just said that there's no one style that applies to everything, but there are certain presentation styles that do have unbelievably prescriptive formats. So this is one from businesses. It's called a Gaddy pitch. So every Gaddy pitch has 3 parts to it. You know when, and then you talk about your problem. What we do at MGA Thermal is we make heat storage. Talk about your solution. In fact, why are you better than everybody else? And it follows that exact format every time. You're not allowed to change those words in bold at all, or it would be considered unacceptable. Unbelievably prescriptive. Others, like a lecture, for example, there's no format whatsoever that you need to follow. So, yeah. What you do want to do as a tip, regardless, is do your best to start with something familiar and easy to understand that everybody in your audience will get it. Whatever you lead with, everybody should get it. It should make sense to everyone. So, this is largely because, particularly if it's the first time you've presented to anybody, they're still getting to know you. They don't know you yet, and there's a lot going on in their brain as they adapt to you. You don't want to be hitting them with information they don't know at the same time. Okay? So your first 1-2 sentences, at least, maybe if you're giving a longer presentation, 1 or 2 minutes, should be really easy to understand. So you see that in the Gaddy pitch. You know when, and then you describe a problem to somebody that you know they know. So it's a really easy opening. Yeah. I like to start by asking you to imagine a situation where blah, blah, blah. So you're kind of leading people into where you want them to be. I do this still. So even though you now know me, at least when I'm giving, when I was giving live lectures, not recorded lectures, I would start every single one of them with exactly the same sentence. And it's just a trigger to you in my audience. Okay, Dylan's starting to speak. Yep, I'm up. I'm ready to go. So this is something that you'll then see. Some people are obviously told that you must give a presentation overview at the start of every presentation. I generally don't like it. If you can sit there and sum up, okay, overall today we're going to talk about mainly these things and mainly why, do a bit of motivation about why your particular presentation is interesting, that's fine. I like that. I'm all for that. Never read a table of contents. Never go, I'm first going to give an introduction and then talk about my results, or my methodology, and then my results, and then discussion, and then conclusions. Like, that was a total waste of time. Nobody needs that, okay? So, presentation overview as a motivation, 100%. If you want it. But never read a table of contents out. Also, this seems obvious, but try and work through your key content in some sense of order. Have it be a story that's being told from start to finish. I talk about how when you write, you don't necessarily want that story. You don't necessarily want that chronological nature. But when you give a presentation, often you do. So try and make it be set up with some sense of order. Or acknowledge when you can't. And that's going to happen to you quite a lot. You're going to just go, all right, I now need to jump from here to here, and these two things are not connected. Hey, audience, these two things are not connected. This is going to be jarring. It's okay. But yeah, try to make it be a story that you are telling whenever possible. This is probably the thing that I would say overall young presenters do worst, is their final sentence. Often they'll get to the end of what they wanted, their final point, and then they'll just trail off into nothingness. You see it in the end of honors projects all the time. And that was the last experiment that I did, and they were the things that I did in my presentation. Thank you. It's not the way that you want to end. You really want to have a nice, clear, okay, and my presentation is over now. So it's generally good to make sure that you've worked on whatever your concluding statements are. And know what your final sentence is going to be, and make sure it's clear that it's over. Just in terms of, this is a general piece of advice, I'm going to say I'm not really sure where it belongs in this entire spiel of how to be a good presenter, but steal it from people. If there's people who you like, who you think are naturally good presenters, watch them, look at the things that they do, and steal stuff from them. The okay, let's get started that I do at the start of every lecture, I stole that from one of my other lecturers who I really thought had a great way of controlling an audience, so I stole it from him. Okay? So watch other good presenters. Number one tip for giving a good presentation: don't overload it. Don't overdo it. Don't go too fast. Don't put too many things in there. Don't confuse people. Make your point as clearly as you possibly can. All right, sweet. So, a few things on both pacing and style that are important. Number one, first thing I'm going to start with is the formality of your presentation. How formal do you need to be? Now, you may notice I'm wearing something slightly different to normal today. So, generally, there is a minimum expectation to your level of formality. Sorry, I'm just going to check where that camera's pointing. Yeah, cool. There is a minimum expectation to the level of formality for when you present. You have to be at least so formal. So if I was to be presenting a pitch for my business, this is what I would wear, because it is the accepted level of formality is button-up shirt and long pants, not jeans, generally. So that's generally the minimum. generally presentations are a little bit more formal. You do need to be a bit careful though in the if you overdo it on the formality, you can create a barrier between yourself and your audience. This very much depends on who your audience is. But a lecturer showing up in a three-piece suit and top hat is probably not really lending themselves any more authority as a formal figure. They're probably just creating a barrier between themselves and their audience. Whereas if you're president, yeah, you're going to be in a suit and tie and that every single time because that's the expected level of formality. So it's quite difficult because you need to be a certain level, but going too high just barriers you from your audience. So it's pretty tricky. In general, for almost everything you're ever going to do, button-up shirt, pants, probably what you want to be at. It's not just clothing; it's also your tone and the way you speak and everything like that. Being a bit formal is good. Being too formal distances you from your audience. Okay, so that's the style and the formality. In terms of speed, getting yourself at the right speed, you're almost always not going to have enough time to do what you want to do. So be aggressive when you cut content. Remember, you're almost always going to have another way of presenting information to people, so it doesn't all need to go in your speech or your presentation or your whatever. There's a document to go with it or something. So be aggressive when you cut content. If you have a particular amount of time to give your presentation in, make sure you don't go over time. There's nothing worse, right? There is nothing worse than being an audience member of a presentation that is running over time. So if you've got a particular time slot, whether it is a 2-hour lecture or whether it's a 2-minute presentation, that's your time. And every audience is always happier for you to finish a little bit early than run a little bit long. If you are running long, don't try to just speed up. So you'll notice most of the time when you do like a 15-minute presentation in a conference style, somebody will hold up a sign going, oh, you've got 3 minutes to go or 1 minute to go or you're out of time. And you'll see a lot of people just try and talk faster. Don't ever do it. Stop yourself. Go, okay, I'm very sorry. I've run out of time. Here are the key points of the rest of the presentation. And if anybody would like, I'm more than happy to talk about it again later. Cut it, all right? It's hard to do that. It's really stressful when you're on stage and you need to do that, but always cut yourself short. Again, people will ask you the questions or you'll be able to follow up with them later. All right, in terms of pace of presentations, you're again probably going to want to cram too much content in because it's all content that you understand quite well, and so your brain can process it really quickly. Somebody who's learning content for the first time processes it maybe a quarter of the pace that your brain processes it. So what you think is applicable to put into a 15-minute or a 2-minute presentation might be 4 times longer than what an audience is willing to live with. So you got to be careful at the pace at which you move through things. Again, cut content aggressively. Less is more. You're also going to need to deliver particularly your first couple of sentences, very slow. And we've touched on this, we'll touch on it again here. At the beginning, your audience is not just learning new content, they're also probably learning a new presenter, and you need to be painfully slow. Now, this can be really difficult because it's really uncomfortable. It's really uncomfortable to deliver your first couple of sentences at half pace, but you need to. And it's definitely something that you want to stand up and you want to practice, saying your first couple of sentences nice and slow. Once people start to get used to you, you can fall back into a more natural pace, but definitely always start a bit slower than a bit faster. And every time you make a big point, so something that you really want your audience to know and remember because it's important, you also need to then stop for a second and let it land. Joe's expression was let it land. I found this horribly uncomfortable because I have this excited energy when I'm presenting, and I want to go, oh yeah, this thing relates to this thing relates to this thing, and move through really quickly. But it meant if ever I did make a big point, I would then move on so quickly that somebody in the audience didn't have time to necessarily appreciate the point that I'd made. So say something important, give your audience 1, 2, 3 seconds to soak it in, and then move on. They won't notice. You will, because you'll be standing up there with 500 eyes looking at you all at once, and you'll be really uncomfortable. But that's fine. Let it land. Okay, so in order to actually map my pacing out, particularly in a 2-hour lecture, but I do this in small presentations as well, is I know I talk too fast. I know I jump between things too quickly. So I insert particular things into my presentations and set myself up in a particular way so that I go slower. So you may remember this from actual in-theater lectures, the 2 cans of Red Bull, one on either side of the room. So having a drink, generally water, is a great way of slowing down. Because when you need to pause for a few seconds and let something land, you can go, you can get your drink, you can take a sip, and you can deliver content again. And it's a much more natural way of putting a pause into your presentation. I need to pause slightly longer than that in lectures, and that's why the cans are scattered across the room, because it means I have to walk to one can, have a drink, walk back to the center. That gives all of you in the audience time to recover from whatever it is that I just presented to you. How I trigger myself as to when I need to go and get a drink, it's a blank slide. I don't know if you've ever noticed this, that occasionally a pure white slide will come up for me. That's a trigger. So I put them in deliberately to go, okay, every time you see a fully white slide, and I'll often skip through it that quickly, but that's a trigger to me that I'm stopping one idea, I'm moving on to a new one, take a short break. Blank slide. And move on. Most people don't notice that any of these things are in there. Most people don't notice why they obviously notice that there are the cans of Red Bull, but don't necessarily know why they're there. That's why they're there. Why there's one on each side of the room, just out of interest, is because I try and drink out of them evenly. And if I run one out before I run the other out, it means I've been spending probably more time on that side of the room, talking to that side of the room more, and I need to balance myself out and talk to the other side as well. It's just a better way to engage such a big audience. That's why I spread them out. That's why there's 2. Cool. That's going to be one of many of the little tricks that I'm going to show you in a couple of slides' time. So, on slides. They're great. Slides are really, really important. Or I say slides, but slides or any visuals whatsoever that you're capable of using. But you want them to add value to your work. You don't want to have slides for the sake of having slides. Now, this is probably the thing that most people get wrong when they do slides, is they overload their audience with information. If you have big, complicated slides appear really quickly, what ends up happening is your audience looks at them, goes, wow, that's a lot of information, and disengages. There's a little bit of science behind this. So if any more than about 4 things appear at once, and that's what this big body of text that nobody read actually says, up to about 4 things, and it's what this GIF is demonstrating. How many items did you see there? Probably just a random number. If it's above 4, the brain seems to go many. If it's below 4, it seems to acknowledge what it is much easier. So you don't want a heap of content to smash into a screen all at once. Your audience will go, that's many of the informations, and disengage. So you step it out. Again, if we remember back to our Apple presentation, that's not many, right? That's one very clear piece of messaging that they wanted their slides to get across. How long you should spend on each slide? Roughly, and this is a very, very rough rule, but a good thing to think is about 1 minute per slide if you've got semi-complicated slides. You don't want hundreds of slides that you're flicking through at 100 mile an hour. Or if you are, you want your slides to be very, very simple. Okay. This is, again, it's the same as pacing. The first time a audience member sees a graph is the big one. It's got axes on it that they have to understand. It's got units on it that they have to understand. Some sort of graph showing something. There's a lot of information for them to process. Now, you as a presenter might only want them to focus on a tiny little bit of it, but they have to process all of it before they can understand that tiny little bit of it. So people flicking through huge amounts of information and graphs and figures really quickly can just be audience overloading. If you do have slides, or figures actually for that matter, being very conscious of things like the text size, figure size, and dots per inch when it's being presented. Is it on a big lecture theatre? Is it on a small screen? How's it coming across? Is it legible? Something that people get wrong a lot is they put in figures that they've shrunk down, and then they need somebody to read the text in the figure, and it's just unreadable. So being conscious of that. I go to all of my lecture theatres and put up a slide with all different text styles, font sizes on it, and walk around the room and check whether or not they can be read from the back corners and stuff like that. You're probably not going to have that opportunity most of the time, but that's the type of stuff you want to do. Another one that's definitely started to appear recently is, are you giving this presentation online, and will it convey well under poor internet quality? So I don't know, I'm hoping that you're all getting an HD stream of this at the moment, but a lot of you may not be. And do my slides still work on somebody who's streaming this at really low quality? Or just streaming the audio? So, yeah, don't overload your presentations with equations. It's generally not the right place for a lot of math. This is interesting. So slide numbers. I really like slide numbers, but a lot of people don't. Some people don't. I like slide numbers predominantly so that people can ask a question and go back, hey, can you go back to slide 25 where you talked about slides and speak more to whatever. I just find that's a really efficient process. The other thing that can be nice for people is to know how many slides are in a presentation and have some measurement of how far through the presentation are we. People like that. Okay, so this is the other thing for your slides. What are your key points? What do you want people to take away from this? Somebody's not going to remember everything. Everything that I've spoken about on here are not something that you're going to remember. So slides are really good for putting a few dot points in that you want somebody to actually take away. Like, I'm going to tell you all of these words, but the things that I actually want you to take away from this are this point, and this point. And maybe they're the ones that you put up on your slides. Okay. They give that structure to your presentation. They can highlight to an audience what's important versus what's just filler content to make a point. Okay. Give you structure. So this is because I'm moving away from slides and I'm moving into something quite drastically different. So pause, use my slides to help create structure, give you a second to absorb. And new topic. So this is on nerves. I'll read this. According to most studies, people's number one fear is public speaking. Number two is death. Death is number two. Does that sound right? This means to the average person, if you go to a funeral, you'd rather be in the casket than doing the eulogy. So it's obviously a joke, but people get really nervous when it comes to presenting. And then that affects everything about their presentation as a result. So I'm going to speak to nervousness for the next little while. This is obviously a lot more fun to do inside of an actual classroom. But before I give a lecture, where would you think I sit on the nervousness scale? So this is my fourth year teaching 1500 and my fifth year being a lecturer. I present for my company as well, and I would say I sit roughly in the same spot before giving a lecture as I do before giving a pitch for my company. I'm not actually our pitcher anymore, but I was for a while. Where do you reckon I sit? Yeah. I would say I got a little bit better this year than I was in the past. But in the past, I would have put myself at about a 9 and a bit, and now I'd probably say an 8 and a bit. I am so nervous before I present that it is not uncommon for me to duck into a bathroom walking between my office and the lecture theatre because I think I'm going to throw up. Because I'm that scared. I always have been. It's it's not something that has ever not terrified me. To this day, it still does. If I get more than a couple of hours sleep on a Sunday night because I'm just constantly waking up and obsessing and being nervous about my presentation the next day, like you can map it from the day before, from a Sunday, you can map my nerves ramping up into a lecture on a Monday. And I mean, literally map it. So I've monitored my heartbeat in this process. It spikes at like 180 beats per minute whilst just before I'm giving a lecture. But yeah, normal resting heart rate of 60 something. Average, I think 110 on Monday when I have to give a lecture that day. So horrifying, right? That's where I sit. Okay. So I'm going to talk to this for a little while because that's not something that a lot of people necessarily realize. And if you ask somebody, do you like public speaking? The vast majority of people say no, they don't like it. But the thing is, yes, that's true. No one likes it. It's terrifying. It's terrifying all the time. It never goes away and it never gets better. What does change is your ability to deal with those nerves. So it's not that I get less nervous than I used to. It's that I'm better at dealing with the fact that I am nervous. Okay. Apparently, I've heard that it's the same for skydivers. They see a similar physiological response. Somebody who's done 1,000 jumps simply deals with that response significantly better. I got some really good advice from a few different people. And I still, to this day, believe Vicky gave me the best piece of advice ever. Don't know if you've ever gotten the pleasure to be taught by Vicky Keese, but lucky if you have, she taught me. And a couple years later, whilst I was still doing my PhD, we were both presenting at a conference together. She asked me if I was nervous beforehand. I was like, yeah, really nervous, da-da-da. Young PhD student presenting at an international conference, to be expected. And I made a throwaway comment like, I'm sure you're not nervous. You lecture to hundreds of people, da-da-da-da-da. And she said she's nervous. She always gets nervous. If you're nervous, it means you care. And I really took that to heart. And I think that's entirely true. The nerves are there because you want to do a good job of this, because you care about doing a good job of it. And honestly, if you're a teacher and you don't care, you should quit. So the day that I don't get nervous before giving a lecture, I will quit and I won't come back. So I don't see my nerves as a bad thing anymore. I see them as a really, really good thing because it means I really want to be there. Joe also spoke to nerves, so gave us all some tips on how to deal with nerves. They're really similar. So you're in a process where you're going to have to speak, and thus one where you're probably going to feel nervous. That's the gig. Get over it. Suck it up. Move on. They're not going anywhere. They're not going to stop. So don't worry about them. Just accept it. Don't try and fight them. Don't try and stop being nervous. Don't be surprised when you get nervous. Don't let it upset you. Don't think that you're going to be a bad presenter because you're nervous before your presentation. Most good presenters are nervous before their presentation. It's not a bad thing in any way. Lean into it. Accept that. Okay, this is going to happen, this is going to happen, this is going to happen, and all of that's fine. That means I care. That means I'm going to give a kick-ass presentation as a result. It's really hard to do that, by the way. But that's the approach that I think you should take to your nerves. As a result of that, I do a whole bunch of things to help myself deal with my nerves as much as I possibly can. So a lot of the things I get nervous about are things that are outside of my control. So I like to put a bunch of things in my control. So one thing for you is this is the first time you'll ever see me lecture not in this specific shirt. This is my blue shirt. This is my lecturing shirt for this year. I do this every year. I go and I buy a bunch of shirts and I try them all on in 2 weeks before semester starts, and I pick one, and that's going to be my lecturing shirt for the year. And when I'm in that shirt, I know it's lecturing time and it's comfortable and I like it, and I'm going to give a good presentation as a result. So I do things like that to help myself be prepared to give a good lecture. So that's something that's in my control. And if I don't have my lecturing shirt, I get nervous as hell. But I have my lecturing shirt. This is one of my formal presentation shirts. So whatever it is for you that you like to do, and I've got other things that I do as well. On every Monday, I look at memes for in a particular window where I know I get really nervous, or all sorts of different stuff like that. Get my cans of Red Bull and stuff. They're all things that I can do to make myself as comfortable as possible to help me deal with the nerves. Rather than just fighting them like an idiot, it's trying to work with them. Cool. I mean, I've been giving away secrets for a little while. I'm going to keep giving away secrets. So these are little tidbits and things, and they're either advice that I've received or advice that I've given to people or found out for myself over the years. So this is all just kind of a random mishmash of stuff that I think helps presentations. So the number one thing that I think helps the most in terms of actually standing and delivering well is to pick somebody in the audience. So don't try and present to an entire audience. It's really hard. Instead, pick a particular person in the audience, preferably a friend, seed them if you have to, invite somebody to your presentation, get them to sit up the back, focus on that person and that person alone, and explain your topic to them. Because I know if I got almost any one of you and just sat you down and said, hey, can you explain your topic to me, you'd give a really good presentation really easily. And people seem to lose that ability once they stand up in front of a crowd. So don't ignore the crowd. Talk to one person. This has a total change on your tone that you take because you're now speaking to a friend and you'll speak with a much, much better tone. You'll be far less stressed because you know the person you're talking to, and you'll be far more engaging because you'll be eyes up looking at a particular person, and that focus in your eyes actually matters. It does narrow you in a little bit onto one person though, so something else that you can do as you get more comfortable is pick a few people. So I still do this occasionally, and I definitely did it a lot in my early lecturing years, was picked 4 people in the crowd, and speak to one, then the other one, then the other one, then the other one. And I was only lecturing to 4 people as far as I was concerned. But that would make me rove around the room and everybody thought I was lecturing to all of them. But yeah, I was really lecturing to just 4 people. And I still do that at the moment. Well, this year I did that a lot with people up in the top row of Griffith Duncan, the worst lecturing theatre of all time. Because I knew I didn't have as much eye contact up the top as I probably wanted to have. This is a big one, particularly once people get a microphone. So regardless of the room you're in, you're talking to the people at the back, okay? You're never talking to the people down the front. Even if you've got a mic, even if you know that you will be projected and everybody will hear you, you want to engage the person at the back and then everybody in front of them gets engaged. If you only engage the people at the front, everybody behind them gets ignored. This can be a problem when you're presenting to a room and you have a marker in the room. For example, a lot of people will turn and present to the marker really, really bad because that marker is looking at not how you present to them, but how you present to the rest of the audience. So don't ever present straight to a marker. Present to somebody up the back. Lecterns can also be a little bit tricky. A lot of the time you'll have slides up on your lectern, and you'll need something to help change slides, and people end up getting caught standing behind a lectern, and that can really diminish your physicality as a result. So I obviously have a clicker, and I get to stand out the front, normally when I give a lecture, but you don't have to do that. Just be aware that once you walk behind a lectern once, lots of people get trapped and they never get out of there again. It's not the end of the world to be behind a lectern, but it can really diminish your ability to engage a class. Regardless, you are confident when you are on stage. Doesn't matter how much of a brown pants moment you actually might be having inside, me all the time. Doesn't matter. You project supreme confidence at all times. And yeah, it will make you more uncomfortable. You will want to have a particular stance, and you're going to have to be uncomfortable to not have that stance to project the confidence. You will get better at it every time you do it. Ah, there's a few things that you can use to grab attention of an audience. I'm going to tell you now not to use any of these in a university presentation because it will be highly frowned upon. But there are a few things that you can do in general in presentations to grab the attention of a room that may not be super paying attention to you. So basically, any unexpected mention of sex or swearing, or if you can make them laugh, all heads will turn to you in an instant. I never use sex as a lecturer, and I wouldn't probably be that confident doing it anyway. I'll occasionally throw in jokes, but I try never to rely on them. And I have once or twice sworn for emphasis on something that I really need to know people remember. But you're obviously playing with fire with any one of these. So you may see advice in different locations telling you to use these particular things to engage an audience. I'm not saying they don't work. I'm saying they're probably not applicable to the presentations that you'll be giving, at least at university. The other thing that I would say is playing with fire, really dangerous, is trying to get your audience to engage. So asking questions to an audience and trying to get them to put hands up and shout out answers and stuff like that. It's really difficult. You'll watch comedians do it and it'll seem super easy, but it's so unbelievably hard to do. I, in general, would just avoid it if I was you. Yeah, it's really hard. I still find it difficult. I used to do things like the only time I'd ever ask an audience a question is if I was literally standing in the audience, because that was the only way that I could reliably get good responses from people. So, yeah, if you can do it well, great, wonderful. You'll have the meeting out of your hand, but it falls flat so often and it's so dangerous. I would, in generally, just avoid it. We covered that. All right, we've sort of covered this as well, that you really want to have a very clear opening and a very clear ending to your presentations. So good first sentence that lets everybody know you're starting, that's nice and slow and easy to understand, and then a good strong finish that concludes and lets people know it's now time to clap. Oh, yes, one for when you're practicing. Standing up and speaking is unbelievably important when you're actually practicing. So if you want to practice your speech and you're sitting down in front of your computer just reading, your pace will be totally wrong. Okay? You want to practice in the same way you're going to present. So that's standing, that's speaking, that maybe walking around. I walk around my house for hours on end whenever I'm practicing these particular presentations. It annoys my girlfriend endlessly, but it helps me get the same energy, the same physicality, and the right pace that I'm going to have when I'm actually standing in front of you presenting, assuming I ever get to stand in front of you and present again. On answering questions. So you'll probably get questions, and you will receive some nasty questions at the end of a presentation at some stage. Nasty or hairy or just unexpected. You're allowed to not know things. So when you're up answering questions, be honest. It'll save you a whole heap of heartache. So you're not expected to know the answer to every single question the minute it comes out of somebody's mouth. There is absolutely nothing wrong with somebody asking you a really good question and saying, wow, that's a really good question. I'm going to think about that for a second. Yeah, you know what? Ooh, yeah, okay, no, what I would do is blah. There's nothing wrong with that response. Taking a few seconds to consider a question is a compliment to the fact that it was a good question. Nobody's going to be offended by the fact that you took some time, okay? So don't be scared to take some time and consider something to be a good question. If you've got the answer right away, great, wonderful. But if you don't stress that you have And it's horrifying to have to stand on stage for 10 seconds and think about something with all the eyes on you. But there's nothing wrong with it. And just admitting, I don't know the answer to that. I'll have to work on that some more. Is not the worst thing that you can say. All right, trying to BS your way out of something on stage is really difficult. Admitting that you don't know literally everything there is to know in the world is not the worst thing to do. This is something that again, for things like conference presentations that are really shortened versions of really complicated topics, I like to make a few slides up that don't go in my presentation, but are what I think someone will probably ask as a question. Now, this is really good if you've got something that ended up on the cutting room floor, so something that you thought maybe should go in there and you cut it for time's sake. Don't delete it, move it to the back, because there's a good chance somebody else is going to go, hey, you really skipped over this, and you get to go, yeah, sorry, I cut it for time. Flick down to your slide that actually explains it. Here it is. This is something that Joe taught us. A lot of the time when you present, you're going to present as part of a cohort. So there will be people presenting before you and people presenting after you. What you really want to do is have some idea of what those people before you have said and what the people coming after you might say, so that what you can say sort of fits in with all of them. So if somebody before you gives a really comprehensive introduction to a topic, you don't have to try and give a really comprehensive introduction to a topic as well. You might be able to go, as was covered by the person before me, who gave a great introduction, by the way. How good was that? I'm simply going to highlight these key points and move on. Okay, so that's something that can really up the quality of your presentations, just being aware of what everybody else around you is doing. It may also allow you to help each other. You can throw compliments to the person who came before. You can lay some groundwork for somebody you know is coming after you. That's almost always seen in an incredibly positive light for you to talk up the other people around you. It's almost universally seen in a negative light for you to try to take any of your fellows down. Yeah. Cool. All right. Couple of don'ts. These are just a few things that maybe you should try to avoid wherever you can. Having a pre-written speech is, again, really dangerous. Trying to write something out and then read it word for word, and definitely reading a speech word for word from a piece of paper is really, really dangerous. If you get, in the best case scenario, you're really disengaging. The tone that you take when you're reading something is generally quite a disengaging tone. And your physicality is atrocious. So that's the best case scenario. But if you, for example, get lost somewhere, and that happens all the time, it's really, really hard to get back into it if it's this perfectly written out speech. Whereas if it's a few dot points that you're going to talk to because you're an expert on this particular scenario, well, then if you get a little bit lost, it doesn't matter. You can just adapt and move on really easily. So the thing to probably keep in mind, even if you haven't written it down, or if you have written it down, doesn't matter. Nobody else has a copy of this transcript of the speech, right? You can go completely off topic and back totally in the wrong direction for a while. Just smile and wave and come back to where you wanted to be. No one's going to know that you said something wrong or something that wasn't written on your speech, okay? So it's never about your ability to memorize and deliver a pre-written speech. That's never something we're going to assess you on, okay? Yeah. If you do mess something up, if you skip over something, you just move on to the next point, you do it a little bit quick and you forgot a sentence or something like that, somebody will ask. Don't stress it. That's what question time is for. They go, hey, I didn't really understand this thing. I think you jumped from here to there. You go, yeah, I messed up a little bit. I'll explain it to you now. All right, so don't stress about having this perfect speech at all times. Same deal is, we've sort of touched on this. Don't worry if you mess it up. If you say the wrong thing or whatever, again, somebody will ask a question, you'll get the opportunity to correct yourself. It's fine. Don't worry about it. Nobody expects you to be perfect when you stand up. Or if it goes wrong, if it tanks, if your slides don't work, your video doesn't play, or whatever happens, you don't have a mic when you thought you would. Don't worry about it. It's okay. You'll find that in that scenario, an audience is generally actually incredibly willing to let a whole bunch of stuff go. Don't stress it. We talked a little bit about this in the PowerPoint 101 video. Go watch that if you're interested. Don't like some slide transitions and animations, great. Don't go crazy in a more formal university level presentation. If you're mic'd up, having something like a hot drink can be really dangerous because a lot of the time the mics have an auto sensitivity on them. So they're going to pick up, if they're not picking anything else up, they'll pick up a really quiet sound and amplify it massively. And a slurp of a hot drink over a massively amplified microphone is not something anybody's wants to hear. Okay, so this one can be tricky. When you've got a slide presentation which is behind you, often you're going to need those slides to be memory joggers for what you're supposed to talk about in your presentation. And that's fine for you to have your presentation, you're looking at your audience, you look back to your slides, you see what you're meant to be up to, and you keep talking. Or maybe you look back to your slides and you have to point something out, and that's okay. Where you get into trouble is when you begin to sit here and talk to your slide for an extended period of time. Partly because you've turned your back and that's poor physicality, but partly because it's also going to mess with the volume of your voice. I've got the mic here being picked up, but if I was actually picking up from the webcam, as I turned around, my voice volume would change enormously, and that happens in a crowd, and that can be really, really bad. So again, it's not something to freak out about if you have turned your back, but whenever you realize you got your back to your audience, turn back around, turn back around. We talked about timing. Although, yeah, no, it's in here. So you'll give a lot. Well, actually, no, you may not. You may give some group presentations during your engineering degree. There used to be a lot. We've cut several of them. Don't go over time in a group presentation. You are just gutting the entire rest of your team. You have a real responsibility to everybody else in your team not to go over time in a group presentation. So make sure you prep for that. So buffer material is something that I like to put in presentations that I know have narrow time limits on them. Is content that I have 3 or 4 different ways of going through it. And I'll generally check how much time I've got. I'll put them in sort of 80% of the way through a presentation. And I'll have a real quick way to go through it, and a normal way, and a really detailed way of going through it. And I'll find out I'm supposed to be at time, whatever, 11 minutes at this stage. If I'm early, I go the long version. If I'm short, I go the quick version. So I deliberately write in my head, a few variations of the way to go through a very specific piece of material, and I have an exact time for when I want to check on that. Cool. Now, preparation and practice. So, out of interest, and I have mentioned this before, but out of interest, how long do you think it took me to make last week's lecture? So that was about an hour of content. Full prep time practicing and before I gave it to you was about 25 hours of work. I knew this slide was coming, so I sort of measured it the last couple of weeks while I've been working on that other content. That took about 25 hours of prep, and it took me about 6 hours to film that take. And it's a bit shit. It's one of the worst presentations that I've given this year because I wasn't very well prepped for it. So the reason that I bring this up is because a lot of people will practice for an hour and then get really nervous and upset that they don't know their presentation very well, and they're looking at other people going, oh no, I'm so crappy at this, look how much better they are than me. It's like, yeah, that's because they spent a month doing nothing but practicing this presentation. Don't sweat it, okay? To produce some of the really high quality presentations can take a really, really long time. This is a slide that I've shown before. This is CGP Grey, who's a YouTuber who makes really dense, really short videos. Every minute of his stuff is 10 to 20 hours of work. That's what it takes to make really high quality content. So I've also sat on the other side of it though, where I had to give a pitch and we were given 10 minutes to write it and then stand up and present it to a cohort of 60 people and a bunch of investors and stuff like that. Basically, do the best with the time that you have. Okay? Sometimes you're going to be totally underwhelmed, underprepared for something that you have to give, and you're just going to have to give it and grind your teeth and get through as best you can. Other times you're going to have an endless amount of time to prepare, and you're going to spend ages and ages and ages just polishing it to try to get it down to something that you like. That's fine. Just take the amount of time that you've got and optimize your presentation in that time. I'm expecting your N1500 pitches to take about a day to prepare. The 2-minute pitch may be a little bit less than a day. The 10-minute pitch may be 2 days to prepare, something like that. But don't stress if you end up massively one side or the other of that. If in order for you not to be nervous, or part of your nervousness process is to practice and practice and practice and practice, great, do that. Who cares? That's fine. If you can, try and spread your prep out over a couple of days. It's much, much easier to learn and to give a good, natural sounding presentation if you've had a sleep between when you wrote it, then when you practiced it, and then when you present it. Okay, so try and spread it out. Sweet. Okay. So that's sort of what I have on presentations. This next bit to sort of end this section off, we're going to talk about criticism. Partially in relation to presentations, but actually partially just in general, how to do criticism. So being a good presenter is definitely something you learn to do. It's not something, well, okay. You will find people who seem to naturally get up on stage and be engaging, and wonderful for them. For the vast majority of us mere mortals, it's something that we learn to do. Okay, and generally the way that you're going to learn this is by practicing and being told what you're doing wrong. So presentations often have a lot of criticism associated with them, and that's what we need in order to improve. A lot of the time, you'll be doing things wrong and you won't realize them. With something like a report, it's fairly easy to write it and then go back and look at it a couple of weeks later and maybe realize the things you did wrong. You don't really get that reflection process with a presentation as effectively. So I had no idea that I had an intimidating stance. I had no idea that I spoke too quickly at the start and I jumped between topics too often. And no matter how many presentations I ever gave, I was never going to realize that for myself. It took somebody to pull me aside and go, you're doing this wrong, you're doing this wrong, and you're doing this wrong in order for me to improve. And that's going to be the same for you. So you have, these were Joe's words, an inner critic, which is going to look at all the things that you do and it's going to think, in your own mind, oh, you did bad at this, you did bad at this, you did bad at this. Your inner critic is it's not worthless, but it's horribly untrustworthy. What you think you're doing wrong versus what everybody else in the audience thinks you're doing right and wrong are generally two totally different things. And you will beat yourself up about something that the audience will think is great. Okay? And inversely, you'll do stuff wrong that you'll do stuff that you think is good and the audience absolutely hates. So, yes, you have an inner critic. Everybody does. You judge your own presentations. It's pretty useless. Get yourself somebody else. Get an external critic. So I did this for many years, went and got people, put them in my lectures, put them in my presentations, and got them to give me feedback every time about what I was doing well and what I was doing badly. Then I'd try and change those bad things for the next week and work on them. So I never would review my own presentations because my opinion of them doesn't matter. It's somebody else's opinion of them that matters. So I'd always get external critics to do my reviews for me. I believe in practicing in front of other people as often as possible and getting as much feedback from them as you possibly can. And get used to this. Every single time I give a presentation, I get, you could have done these things better. Okay. It's not, doesn't always make you feel good about yourself. You're always going to be criticized. And that's perfectly okay. That's not the end of the world. That doesn't mean you're a terrible presenter just because you've got things that you can work on to be better. We all do. We always do. It's how we get better. Doesn't necessarily mean it's fun though. So particularly on something that you've really invested heart and soul into, and then you cop a whole heap of negative feedback for it, can be really, really horrible. It's just emotionally devastating to have to go through some of this. And occasionally you're going to get somebody who wants to be nasty. Or maybe not even nasty, but they're going to unload on you with a whole bunch of negative feedback. And there's not a lot you can do other than sit there and take it. So that's something that I've received through 1500. Definitely a lot of negative feedback. You'll find once people become anonymous, they get really nasty in the way in which they phrase feedback. The exactly same thing if they were giving feedback and their name was to be attached to it, even if the person receiving the feedback never knew who they were, once their name's attached to it, their feedback's generally really not, at least phrased in a much nicer way. As soon as they become anonymous, they become nasty. Um, so that's one way in which you will receive negative feedback, or I have received negative feedback. Another one is as part of the company, I've been in meetings with people who were deliberately playing the red team. So they were there to come after me, or come after the company, I should say. And I'd not known that was coming. So going into a meeting and having somebody drop in at the last minute and say, "Oh, by the way, I'm just dropping in," and having this full list of ammunition that they were just going to unleash on us for several reasons, to check whether you actually have a good thing going on underneath, or whether basically your whole thing is smoke and mirrors. So you'll find this a lot. They're going to poke until it hurts, and then they're going to keep poking to see what you do. And sometimes they're going to poke solely to see how much pain you're willing to take. How long are you willing to stand there and cop body blow after body blow after body blow before you fall down? And I've been in both of those scenarios. And it's horrible. It's a really, really horrible scenario to be in. What often happens the first time is you just go total deer in the headlights, right? You can't think, you can't avoid it, you can't protect yourself, and it just totally wrecks you. You can't make a coherent thought. Um, and in a scenario where somebody's trying to pressure you for information or something like that, you become useless. So I'd say what happens after that, the second time, the third time, the fourth time somebody comes after you, again, it's not that it hurts any less. It's that you get better at dealing with that confrontation or that negative feedback. And you can start to think it through a little bit more, and you can start to rationalize it and go, okay, today's going to be a nasty day. I'm going to have to sit there and cop a few of these, but I can do something useful with it. You will want in this scenario to get really defensive really quickly. You'll want to start to disregard the criticisms that are getting thrown at you. You're going to want to start to undermine the person throwing them at you. And this overall will stop you from improving. Getting highly defensive stops you from getting better. Now, I know that I get defensive immediately. If you come after me, but more importantly, if you come after one of my friends, I really quickly become defensive, and then I can't improve as a result of that. So that's something that I know I need to be conscious of not doing. And at the end of the day, remember that it's an opinion. Whatever negative feedback you get, even if it comes from somebody who may know more than you in the field, generally it's an opinion. Okay? I tended, at least at the start, to really overreact to negative feedback, until I realized that I was often getting criticized from both sides at the same time. So I get criticized every year for my lectures being too slow, too basic, too easy, not having enough content in them. And simultaneously get criticized for overloading students with information, going through things too quickly, having lectures where the content is too hard. I get both every year. And Thus, it's an opinion, right? Don't take it too much to heart. Don't get upset about somebody's opinion on something you've worked really hard on. So flipping that around, if these are all the things that can happen when you're copying negative criticisms, if you're in the other seat here and you've got the opportunity to give feedback to somebody, how can you do it well such that your feedback can actually be useful to them? The first and most important thing that you want to do is attempt to build trust with the person you're giving feedback to, particularly if it's negative feedback. If you come out adversarial, they will become defensive, and then you just have a pissing contest about opinions, and it doesn't really do anything useful, right? So what you want to do is, hey, I'm going to critique you here, but I am actually on your side. I'm doing this to try to help you. So it's a building of trust and establishing some empathy first. Is going to mean that people are going to listen to your feedback much better. So wherever we can, we always start with something positive. And I don't care how hard you have to look, you go and you find something positive first so that you can try and go, hey, you did this well, and I can empathize with how hard this might be, and now I'm going to try and help you by providing some things for you to work on to get better. So this is probably the most important thing. You're not there to throw mud. You're not there to say, this sucks. You're here to go, I think if you could do this, you would be better. You've got to provide a way for the person to improve whenever you provide negative feedback. Sometimes you're not going to have that way. And maybe you then have to throw your hands up in the air that you're at fault and you can't think of a way to fix it. And it might still be a valid criticism. But yeah, you don't just throw mud at people. So there's a quote, I think, from Teddy Roosevelt that's a complaint without a way of improving is called whining. Because that's effectively all you're doing. You're just whinging at somebody if all you're going to do is complain and not try and help them improve. Because a lot of the time when somebody's done something that you don't like, there's a reason for it. They've made a specific decision. They've done one thing in one particular way for complicating factors. And maybe they got it wrong, but they need to know how to do it better in order to improve. Also, yeah, be specific with that. So you suck is not useful. You specifically suck at doing this thing. Do it better in this way is really useful. Okay, so you got to be specific with your feedback. There is the tendency for people as a result to then only give positive feedback or overly positive feedback. Oh, this was really great, but change this, and this. It's like, well, it wasn't great then. It was crap. So only providing positive feedback is generally not very helpful to somebody to let them improve. They need to know specifically the things that they're doing wrong. Or saying, this is great, but you should change these things can just be interpreted as, oh, this is great, move on, don't worry about it. It's like, oh, no, this was great, these things are bad, work on them. So, yeah, be conscious. You should be positive, but you don't have to overdo that. I know that this is a little bit of a weird aside to sit inside of this lecture, but you're going to be asked to give a lot of feedback in your life. Make it useful. You may as well, right? You're going to have to do it regardless, so make it useful. You can change a lot in this world by giving feedback in the right way. Cool. All right, so recapping the presentation side of things. So a few things that we covered is, yes, they're scary as hell. That never goes away, and that's okay. We can deal with that. You learn to be good at presentations like you learn every other form of communication, which is great because if you're bad at them now, you now have a strategy to start getting better. A lot of the things that we covered today are things that nobody ever sat me down and told me, and that's why I jammed so many of them into this bit of presentation, because they weren't taught to me through school in any stage, they weren't taught to me through university at any stage, so I thought that I'd sit you down and hit you with a whole bunch of them. And key thing to being good at presentations is practice, practice, practice. Okay. With that practice, you're going to improve by receiving criticism in general, or receiving feedback in general. Often it will be criticism, and you can use that to make yourself better and hopefully you can now give more useful feedback to people as well. Cool. All right. So the last little bit of this lecture is going to be on professionalism. And this is something that's a little bit weird. This actually used to go first in this set of lectures. I'll put it at the end because I actually think it's a little bit less relevant this year than it's been in the past. In general, because this cohort has displayed an exceptionally high level of professionalism, that to some extent some of this content's not going to be needed to a lot of you. I'm going to put it in anyway because there are bits and pieces, hopefully some diamonds in the rough here. So, yeah. I guess if we want to think about our professionalism, a lot of what you probably want to think about is if somebody meets you today, or if I was to meet you at the end of week 12, having not seen you in quite a while, who would you be to me? How would you be summed up in a key moment? How much does somebody know about you? It's probably pretty little. They probably don't know very much information about you at all, to the vast majority of you. So it's going to be some very small things that people are going to influence decisions about how they perceive you, and how they perceive you is going to influence decisions about how they perceive your work. So in an important moment, test day, for example, might be one of them. Job interviews are probably the big one, where most people get summed up really quickly. Same with discipline hearings. Also the same with any of the company stuff, the innovation entrepreneurship stuff. When you meet somebody for the first time, when you pitch to an investor, you get summed up really quickly. So in these big moments, it's tiny little things that can make huge flow-on effect differences. Probably the most common ones I'd say that make a first impression, and first impressions really count in this game, is your timing. That's generally being on time to things. So this is something that I got as feedback from industry when I was talking to them about creating 1500. Is what do you want students to be better at? Handing stuff in on time was their thing. It depends heavily on your industry, but particularly government sector, 1 second late is late, and it's a zero. If you put a tender application in 1 second late, it is rejected on the spot. Job applications, 1 second late, rejected on the spot. That's something that industry saw as really, really important. When we did all of our company stuff and we went through a process where they whittled 25 teams down to 8 in order to proceed through to the next round, one of the major things they used was if they said we were starting at 8 a.m. the next day, they just checked off who was there at 8 a.m. the next day. Or in reality, they checked off who was there at 7:50 the next day. That was a major metric for them. The other one that you'll get is formatting, obviously. So before somebody even reads your documentation, did you format it correctly? If they asked you for a PDF, they literally won't read anything that's not a PDF or a Word doc or a whatever. Okay, so it's another great thing in job interviews and stuff like that where they just get to go, nah, all of these people are going in the bin. Why? They formatted this the wrong way. Done. So to some extent, this is going to be that reputation that you carry around with you. Your reputation is rarely built from your technical skills. It's almost always built from your non-technical skills. So is this professionalism? It's part of it. Professionalism's a big and nebulous concept, but this type of stuff is part of it. I sort of mentioned this before. A lot of this is 1% efforts, and they're 1% efforts that build on top of each other, and they accumulate to have massive effects, or they can accumulate to be devastating. So there's a few bits in this last section that's kind of motivational lead posters. I do honestly really believe this one. Snowball effects, particularly in business, are enormous. So do your 1% things right. I think the best way for you to think about your professionalism and your professional face at the moment is to consider yourself to be an engineer. And you'll notice that I actually speak to you in a very specific way around when I call you engineers. I don't say you will be engineers, you might be engineers. I say you are engineers. You're engineers in training, but you are currently an engineer. And think of yourself that way. And it will change the way in which you perceive this, and it will become a career choice for you. So you realize being an engineer is more than just solving nasty technical problems. It's about being a problem solver in general. Being a person who provides solutions, not excuses, not new problems to solve. Constantly is Yeah, somebody who can provide a solution. And that then becomes your reputation, and that's something that you want to hold on to. So, as a result of the fact that I think of you as engineers, I correspondingly treat you as engineers. And a lot of the time that means I'm a little bit rough with you in certain situations. Figure it out for yourself. Nah, that's on you. And I honestly believe that's because you're capable. You're capable beyond what most people give you credit for. And really commonly, people will turn around and say, oh my God, look at these things that these first years were capable of producing. I'm like, yeah, they're real good. You just not giving them enough credit, and thus you're not giving them enough opportunity to demonstrate how awesome they can actually be. So that's one of the reasons why I do push you all a little bit and give you so big open-ended problems and say, no, I'm not going to tell you how to do that. You figure that out for yourself, because I know that you are capable if somebody simply gave you the license to be capable. So yeah, this is all part of me trying to turn you into super successful engineers, not just people who are mimics, people who can basically go, oh, I got the textbook, here is the example in the textbook, and I memorized it. That's totally useless to you as an engineer. How are you going to be a problem solver? How are you going to be useful to humanity? I think this is probably for me, was the most important thing that I stuck to in being successful in a weird and evolving field, which was both making Eng 1500, but it was also doing my company, was it's not fair. It's never going to be fair. Never assume that the scenario that you're ever going to be put in your life again is going to be fair. Even if people do their best to make it and have exams and assignments with set dates and things to make it fair, don't assume it's fair. It's not fair. Figure out how it's not fair and use that to your advantage. How are you going to win in the scenario that you're in? All right? How are you going to win with what you've got? And once you can start thinking about the entirety of life in this particular way, not, oh no, this is so much harder for me because I don't have this advantage. What do you have instead that's going to allow you to, on some level, win? And it might be, I have absolutely no advantage. Everybody else is better set up than me. But I was still really competitive, even as a result of having no advantages. So when I get in a position where I have advantages, I'm going to smash it. And you might consider that to be a win. But yeah, abandon the concept of fair. You should abandon it immediately. Cool. This slide's going to come across a little bit negative. It's not meant to be super negative. It was just the most efficient way I could think of conveying this. So a few things that you want to avoid, basically ever doing again. It's not my fault or it's not my problem. Are two things that you just don't get to say as an engineer, ever. Your job is to be a problem solver. Everything is your problem. And if it doesn't work, it's always your fault, because you should have been all over it, okay? This actually now, particularly if somebody was, say, to get hurt, under the law, it is your fault, and it is your problem, and it is your fault. So the example being, if somebody was to get hurt in an Eng 1500 classroom because they did the wrong thing, the workshop leader would be responsible because it was their job to train them to do the right thing. But I am also directly responsible. It was my job to teach my workshop leaders to teach you how to do things correctly. So I don't get to close my eyes and go, no, my students did the wrong thing. That's not my fault. Nope, 100% is, and the man with the white wig believes so as well. So everything is your fault and your problem once you get out as an engineer. Negligence is never something that you get to hide behind. Oh no, I didn't see that. I didn't know about it. I didn't know is never going to be considered acceptable. Now, you're not going to be on top of all of the information that ever exists in the world always, right? But you still needed to have made the effort to have done your best in every scenario. So, for example, I know I don't see every one of your emails every week. That's why I hold a help session every Monday where you can come in and ask all of your questions. It's because I don't get to claim the negligence, right? So trying to be across everything is really important. This hasn't actually happened very much this year. So this is a little bit out of place. I've left it in just to highlight it. I don't think any students actually approached me about this year. Coming up and saying, oh, this particular thing doesn't work. So, the Blackboard submission doesn't work, or the classic example was with assessment 3, none of the ones in the folder are there. I'm like, yes, they are. You just messed up your searching, and you now look like a total idiot. So yeah, just be careful with that. Yeah, somebody else got away with it, so it should be okay for me to do it. That, as an attitude, is just implies that you want to be the lowest common denominator, and that's just the worst attitude imaginable. So, okay, cool. The next couple of these are all kind of about question answering. So, there's a few of these in a row. Bear with me for a second here, because this is going to sound a little bit weird and a little bit critical, but you will have heard the expression "it can't hurt to ask," or "there are no dumb questions." And this is, I think, incredibly dangerous approach to have. I'm not saying that you shouldn't ask questions, but it definitely can hurt to ask dumb questions, and there are certainly dumb ways of asking questions. Not because you're showing ignorance. So you're allowed to be ignorant of things. You're allowed to not know things, and you're allowed to ask questions to find things out, and you should do that. That's excellent. And largely, if you don't know something about the course, maybe it's my fault for not explaining it to you properly, and that's perfectly fine. Where you can get in trouble is when you ask, "Oh, I don't know how to do this. What does this mean?" And I go, "That was in the lecture, and I talked about it in the help session, and it's in an email, and it's in your workshop slides. Your ignorance is now due to a lack of effort. You clearly haven't bothered to be engaged, and that's why you're asking this dumb question. That looks really bad." Okay? Whereas, "Hey, I've watched your lecture and read your email. I still don't understand this." I will make all the time in the world to help that person. But the person who doesn't know something solely because they're too lazy to look it up for themselves, that's where you can get yourself in a little bit of trouble. Okay. Why is this so important? Is because most of you probably don't ask enough. Ask enough number of questions, but even ask for as much help as you possibly could. This is something that we realize massively doing company stuff, but a whole bunch of different areas. If you can ask a question in the right way, you'd be astounded at what people are willing to give you as a result. So by prepping yourself, by being ready to ask questions properly, you can ask for heaps of stuff. And I'm talking about asking for $500,000 of capital, or asking for people to give up literally hundreds and hundreds of hours of their own time for free to help us understand something. People will do that. Not a problem, as long as you know how to ask the question properly. It might take you months to prepare to ask that question, but it can be done. I think one of the reasons why I wanted to talk about this is, I think something that probably needs to get pointed out is, most of you are carrying a stereotype around. And it's kind of simple at the moment because there's two real popular stereotypes. You're one of two things at the moment. You're a millennial or you're a boomer, right? I'm going to take millennial as the example because I assume that's most of my class. You have a stereotype that you carry around. When you talk to people, boomers talk to you or whatever, they have a stereotype of you. And if you do things that reinforce that stereotype, they're going to be really happy to jump on top of them. So you're almost starting at a bit of a disadvantage. And you want to be really careful that you're not reinforcing that stereotype, okay? So, I mean, I don't agree with the stereotypes. I think most of them are totally unfounded, and you can go back thousands of years and find the older generation always saying that the younger generation is lazy and this and everything. It goes like, there's a quote from Socrates, I think, talking about it. But you still need to be aware that that is a stereotype that does exist, and you probably have a stigma attached to you, and you want to be conscious of breaking that. All right, I've sort of addressed this, but you guys deserve it. Overall, this year, the professionalism on average, there's been a few hiccups, but on average, the professional of this cohort has been outstanding. It's been incredible. So much so that I considered cutting this entire section. I think I mentioned that. I've had so many conversations with people about how the students dealing with the switch to online and dealing with this and dealing with that, and I was like, they're unbelievably good at it. The the way that you've adapted, the professionalism that people have shown in this trying time has been incredibly good. So keep it up. You're building a really positive reputation for yourselves. Cool. All right. A few other things that sort of fit into here around professionalism that can get you into trouble is culture, cultural differences. Because what's considered professionalism or a professional way of being changes depending on what culture you're in. So you actually have a fairly strong culture in Australia. Nobody really, I shouldn't say a fairly strong culture. You have enough culture to get you into trouble, basically. So one thing that I talk about in Australia, for example, is we have a very flat structure, big pride of the working class man and stuff like that. So very flat, not a lot of hierarchy in an Australian culture, which can be an issue when you go into other places. One that I like to establish this is, should you tip? In Australia, should you tip? In America, should you tip? The answer is most certainly. In Japan, should you tip? Certainly not. It's frowned upon. It's almost considered an insult to the person who you are tipping. And in Australia, it's different again, right? So totally different cultures totally change how you might be perceived doing exactly the same action. And then this corresponds out to all sorts of other things that you're going to do. Business cards is a big one. Generally through Asia, there is a very, very strict business card etiquette in the way in which you present and receive, and the level of importance that you give to the business card. Like, you never put them in your back pocket, for example. In Australia, you get a business card of somebody, oh, cheers, man, chuck it straight in your pocket. Totally unacceptable in a lot of other cultures. So, stuff that can be really important. Titles is a big one. Again, Australia being different here. I have no problems with you calling me Dylan. That's fine. I think that adds the ability for me and yourselves to empathize with each other and create a really harmonious teaching scenario. But that's just not a thing outside of Australia in general, and to some extent not a thing outside of Newcastle. So when I was in Cambridge, I'll tell two stories about this. The first quick one being, I called the professor over there, me and my friend went over together, we called the professor Michael by his first name. We didn't realize for quite a while why everybody kept giving us strange looks because we called him Michael. Literally everybody else called him Professor Carpenter at all times, other than the couple of Australians who all called him Michael. Now, he'd spent enough time in Australia and he knew it and he got it and he got our culture and he was fine with it. But people used to look at me funny because I dared to call a professor by their first name. Whereas in Australia, hey Dylan, how you going? Yeah, cheers mate, no dramas. Totally different culture, right? Whilst in Cambridge, I got invited to dinner. So Cambridge, the university, is broken up into a whole bunch of different colleges. Some of these colleges are really proud of their history. This is a very old university. This is their main dining hall. This was built 400 years ago, I think, and hasn't really changed since, i.e. there's no electricity or anything like that. All this architecture is as it was hundreds of years ago. So it's fully candlelit, stuff like that. I got invited to dinner. I got warned, hey, this is going to be formal. So me and my friend Anthony, we prepped a little bit for this. How do I be formal? And it was kind of a running joke for us until we arrived. We didn't go in. We were met at the gates of the college, which is totally encased in a wall to stop a battering ram. We met by a porter. We were escorted into an antechamber where we were introduced to everybody who would be sitting at the head table. Once the head of the table, the professor, arrived, we were led in one by one into this room. We were announced. All of the students who sat down here stood. We filed in, filled the table. The professor said grace in Latin. The students answered in Latin. He sat, the head table sat, the students sat. They brought the food out. Of like hidden doors and stuff, they brought the food out, served it to everybody. Now, I was sitting just here. The professor was sitting there at the head of the table. They served all the food out. It was fine. And nobody ate. And I sat there, waited patiently, looking around for somebody else to start eating first, kind of looking at the professor. He eventually leant over and said to me, hey, you actually need to eat first. Can you sample a little bit of every dish? Which I was very confused about, and he went on to continue. Historically, the food tester sat to the right of the king. or the head. So I tested every dish and said, yes, these are all okay to eat. And then the professor started to eat, and then the head table ate, and then the rest. So that was a very different culture to normally having dinner in Australia, right? Where we'd go to a pub and yell at a football screen or something. And so there were a lot of things that I could have done very badly in this scenario and really hurt my reputation by not necessarily understanding the culture that I was in. Yeah, so it's just an aside there that, again, the things that contribute to how successful you are technically as an engineer can be massive. General advice, like an email, always start a little bit more formal than your colleagues, and then you can easily sink back down to less formal. Whereas if you start less formal, it's really hard to drag yourself back up. I was not more formal than that Cambridge thing. All right, another one is meeting culture. So something that needs to be thought about by most teams to be effective in their meetings. The number one most important thing universally for having a productive meeting is being on time. Universally, top to bottom, doesn't matter how big your company is, whatever, what it does, it's actually being on time to meetings is attributed to being the most important thing to being successful or not, which I really found surprising. Most of the time you should have a meeting agenda whenever you're going to meet. It doesn't have to be long, but it's what are we covering today and who's covering it. So everybody sort of knows what the plan is. That allows people to be prepared for the thing that they're supposed to be doing. And it also allows you to go, guys, we've been on this for too long. We need to put a pin in it and move on to something else. At the end of your meeting, you should all come away with actions. What is it that people are going to do, and by what time are they going to do them? Now, you may notice meeting agendas, actions, these were basically your milestone tasks. This is what I was trying to build you towards. Should you keep meeting minutes? Legally, a lot of the time you have to, but actually in terms of outputs, they're totally useless. So if you don't legally have to, generally don't keep minutes. Have really clear actions and deliverables instead. Be aware that you don't waste more time in all of this creating agendas and stuff than actually doing work. Remember, work doesn't get done in meetings, okay? Work gets done and then you present it in meetings. All right, overall, I think we've sort of made this point, but when people are looking to invest in you, and that might be invest money in you, but it also might be simply give you a job, they're going to make their mind up about you really, really quickly. And it's your professionalism that's generally going to be far more important than any of your technical knowledge. And this can get judged really quickly. So in a pitch, you'll generally get 3 minutes, and that's enough. So people will decide about your entire company within 3 minutes, but it can actually be much less than that. Wasn't me, but I used to lead with this as well. Some people I know. Hi, I'm part of a team of 3 engineers from the University of Newcastle. You're done. We're done. This is over. I'm not investing in you. That was enough to lose them. It should have been, hi, I'm the Chief Research Officer of MGA Thermal. What that was said was, totally unacceptable. That was enough to lose somebody a deal. So professionalism really matters. And we're done. That's it. So sorry this one was a bit long, but it is now all done.